In 1902, a young man graduated journalism school, and he went to his first job interview at his metropolitan newspaper, and the editor was questioning him and noticed that the young man had unusually smooth, non-working hands and wondered how this was possible. So he said to him, "Did you go to school on a scholarship?" "No." "Did your father pay your way?" He said, "No." He said, "Well, how did you make your tuition?" And he said, "Oh, it's my mother." He said, "We lost my father when I was an infant, and my mother washed clothes to put me through school." So the editor said to him, "Well, I have your first assignment to you. When you come back tomorrow, I'll let you know if you have the job. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go home and look at your mother. Look right at her face, and then look at her hands. And then I want you to take those hands and wash them." Well, the graduate was kind of surprised, but he was looking for a job, so he went home, and he did as he was instructed. Well, the next day he went back for his second interview, and the editor said, "Well, please describe your experience for me." And the young man opened his mouth, but no words came out, but tears came from his eyes. And when he finally could speak, he said, I never really looked at my mother before, and I certainly never really looked at those hands that worked so hard." He said they were cut, they were calloused at places, they were bleeding. He said, "I had to hold them so gently as if I could break them, and yet I knew how strong they were because of her love for me." He said, "And you know, yesterday afternoon, I helped her do that laundry." And the editor said, "You've got the job, because now you have a heart that can really see. And you'll be able to do your work as a journalist because you're looking at people. Everyone you meet has a story like your mother, a story of love, a story of sacrifice, a story of doing things for others. Those are the stories worth seeing, and those are the stories worth telling." As we begin our theme for the fall time, God is Love, I think that story illustrates how we mirror God's sacrificial love for us. And in our banner, we see the cross as that symbol of what Jesus has done for us. Jesus' work, his sacrifice, his suffering for us. And we see that heart, the cross is at the center of the heart, very much like the heart of that mother for her son. We also see two joined hands. We've used the image of hands before, God reaching out to gift us, and us reaching out with our other hand to gift, to care for, to work for one another. Those hands are joined together in a sign of what our mission is as followers of Jesus, that we, like St. Philip, our patron, have been told, "You will do the works I do and greater works." Our work is love, and that love involves pain and sacrifice and joy. It also represents diversity because, like the colors of our Del de Vere windows shown in those hand illustration, we know that we all do it in our own way, in our own giftedness. Our love, the love that God has placed in our hearts, the love that God asks us to share with one another, is individual and unique to us. God has given us a part of God's love to share that has never been seen before and will never be seen again. So the color diversity reminds us about how unique our words and our deeds are to God. And then we see the second part of the words there, God is love, which is from the letter of John. But it says underneath a very famous quote by the author Victor Hugo, to love another person is to see the face of God. It's a poetic way of saying God has placed God's love in us, and when we share that, it's a reflection of God's love, because we're made in God's image and likeness to love, to be love, and to be love in action for one another. So in a few words and images, we kind of capture the essence of what we'll be looking at these next few weeks in our theme. And today's gospel touches that in a different way, because Jesus is challenging his listeners to look at their relationships, at their possessions, at their decisions in new ways. In other words, so many people in the crowd were following Jesus, and he's saying, yeah, we're having a lot of fun now, but there's challenges ahead. Make sure you take a good look at who you love and how you love and where and when you decide to love. So that will be a part of our challenge too. Jesus is a bit harsh in the gospel, making a point, as any good teacher does. Don't take anything for granted. Everything needs to be looked at and evaluated in prayer so that we can do the next right thing, the next loving thing, and that's wisdom, to bring the choices we have to love each day to God in prayer. Our first reading speaks about the gift of wisdom. Now, in a very practical example, we hear in the letter to Philemon, Paul saying that he wishes that community to look at Onesimus in a different way. He's got a funny name, but he was a good guy. Okay, so he was a slave in that community who was freed, and he followed Paul to help him in his work. They went to prison together. They had a really rough time, and now Paul is sending him back, and he says, look at him differently. He's no longer a slave. He's not even just your brother in the Lord. I'm sending him to you like a son. In fact, I'm sending to you in him my own heart. Now, we know as we grow in love for other people, we start to see them differently. They're acquaintances, they're friends, they're people we love, they're people we'd be willing to sacrifice for. That growth in love, in the depth of love, and in our commitment to act on that love that Paul is challenging those people of Philemon to do today, is exactly the heart of what we'll be doing in the theme, looking at the people right around us to really look at them and to see them in new ways through the eyes of faith, through the eyes of prayer, through the eyes of Christ. To try to see in the people around us the image and likeness of God, or to put it very simply, so that we can love the people around us and recognize what's there behind the surface, which is the very face of God. We're not in this together by accident. Now, this sounds great on paper. It's quite a different thing to live, all right? So that's why we put the cross right in the middle. And we'll be looking at the obstacles that come to us in love, and also we'll be looking at the solutions that God gives us, the recommendations that God gives us in prayer to turn our faces with grace to love. That is at the heart of our hymn and our thinking, that this theme involves turning our faces with grace, with God's help, to love, to be love, and to be loving. Deep within, God has placed that desire for us to love and be loving. To live it out is something that we do as a community, as a church, as a people of faith, through our prayer and through the sacrament. So we're going to be doing some very practical things in the future weeks to come in the bulletin, on the website, so that we can be love for one another and see more clearly God in our own faces and in the faces of each other. So, in order to make this practical and not just a homily, but a prayer experience, I want to take a few moments, and Frank is going to play the tune of the hymn that's our theme hymn, which will be, Lord, turn our face with grace to love. That's not important. You'll listen to the music of that. You might recognize it from other words. We rewrote the words. It was, "Oh, breathe on me, O breath of God." That's the tune. But I'm going to ask you to close your eyes now. Take a deep breath. Remember that we're in God's presence. God is love. And to love another person is to see the face of God. So in your mind's eye, in a prayerful way, call to mind the faces of the people that have loved you and that you have loved. Those people are gifts from God to you, to know God's face. You have seen God's face in them. Thank God for the gift of those faces, for the gift of those loves. God is love. To love another person is to see the face of God. Amen.